Good afternoon and welcome. This is actually the 750th meeting of the Economic Club of New York, and I'm Barbara Van Allen, President and CEO of the club. We're recognized as the premier nonpartisan forum in the nation for social, economic, and political discussions. And we've been actually doing it now for over a century. And we've hosted literally over 1,000 prominent guests. And this certainly contributes to the tradition that we've all inherited from our prior leadership. And this continues through to today. I'd like to give a special welcome to students joining us virtually from the Cooney Graduate Center, the Zicklin School of Business at Baruch College, and Mercy University. Congratulations and welcome to members of the newest class of fellows. We have a couple joining us today, I believe, virtually. This is our largest and most diverse class ever. I think there are 87 New York fellows, and then another 8 fellows around the country, including a fellow in Beijing that are participating virtually. And that's a program that grew from 5 years ago and has just been successful beyond our wildest dreams. And thank you to the members of the club that sponsor these fellows every year. For today's program, we're honored to welcome David Ricks. Dave is Chair and Chief Executive Officer of Eli Lilly and Company, a Lilly veteran with more than 25 years with experience in marketing, sales, drug development, and international operations. He became CEO and was subsequently elected chair of the company's board of directors in 2017. Harnessing the power of biotechnology, chemistry, and genetic medicine, Lilly scientists are advancing new discoveries to solve significant health challenges, including diabetes, obesity, Alzheimer's disease, cancer, and debilitating autoimmune diseases. Under his leadership, Lilly has delivered a record R&D output and business results, positioning the company for continued strong growth and expanded impact on human health around the world. He earned his Bachelor of Science degree from Purdue University and an MBA from Indiana University. Recently, he was awarded an honorary doctorate degree in pharmaceutical management from Purdue. He serves on the board of directors for Adobe and Business Roundtable. In addition, he's a member of the board and former board chair of the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America. He's a member of the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and the association's CEO Steering Committee, the Business Council, and the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office's Council for Inclusive Innovation. The format today will be a conversation in which we're honored to have Caroline Hyde as our moderator. She's an anchor who I'm sure you're all familiar with on Bloomberg television, where she hosts a flagship daily technology show out of New York. We're going to end promptly at 1 o'clock, and questions submitted in advance have already been shared with Caroline. So as a reminder, this conversation is on the record. We do have media on the line, as well as a large virtual audience. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dave and Caroline to the stage.
Just thinking about when you took the reins as CEO, 2017. Now, not everyone looks at the charts as much as I do, and I'm sure you never spend a moment looking at the share price, but the fact that it has tenfolded under your leadership, and of late it has been just an extraordinary time for us all to be discussing, and attention completely ripped, whether it's AI on one side, but ultimately suddenly we're talking about GLP-1s or GIPs, and none of us quite know what it stands for, but we do know is it seems to be a cure for not only just, well, obesity, but they're having profound effects on heart, on liver, on all parts of ultimately the way in which we can be driving our health. And I just want to understand with Mounjaro, with Zepbound, how much you feel that the oxygen is being sucked out of the room of just all this obsession with this new breakthrough that you have been helping drive?
Yeah, great question. Great to be with you all today and online. And Barbara, thanks for having me here at this prestigious lunch. It's difficult to go to cocktail parties these days without getting one sip in and a question about weight loss drugs, GLP-1. What is GLP-1? People say it without knowing it, as you said, GIP and so forth. And what an honor that is to have such a interesting invention that can augment so many people's lives. So, we've been working in this space for a very long time. Yeah. That's probably not well recognized. We licensed our first GLP-1, we partnered it with a company called Amylin in 2003. We launched the drug in 2005. It was a twice-a-day injection, and it wasn't very good, but it was the first GLP-1 drug. So I like to talk about this as sort of a 20-year overnight success. Most of the appreciation of that has come in the last 18 months, but kind of what we do well, and I think underappreciated part of our industry is the time and energy it takes to create so-called breakthroughs. In some ways, the industry showed a lot of prowess during COVID, and we're very proud of that. But viral pathogens are really easy to conquer. Human disease that's more metabolic, or cancer, which is innate, or immunity, are much harder. And that sort of taught everyone that if we just put enough money and attention on something, we could fix it in a year, right? But that's not how most diseases work, and not how obesity works. But through the years, we iterated and we found new things. Mostly that what was a drug designed for blood sugar control, that if we could give it at higher doses, you saw pretty profound weight changes. And then our scientists in the early part of the 2010s noticed that if we put two of these so-called incretin family proteins, so as you're eating your salad, your stomach is sending proteins to the other parts of your body to say, I'm being fed right now. One of those is GLP-1, which really affects glucose signaling. Another is GIP, which affects fat metabolism. Right. And by putting them together in a mouse in 2010, we demonstrated that you would lose even more weight, and it tolerized as well some of the nausea that people experience with GLP-1 alone. So we went about designing that into a drug, which we did in 2014. And in 2016, I remember a phone call I got from our current chief scientific officer. He was in a different role at the time, saying, you have to see this data. We tried this medicine in like a dozen people in Singapore who were otherwise healthy, most of which had to drop out of the study because they lost so much weight, they needed to eat.
Oh my goodness.
So at that moment, I was like, okay, now we go as hard as we can.
And when you're trying to go as hard as you can, ultimately there is a sheer force of demand and limitations of supply. What does that look like right now? Because this is able to be consumed, to be used almost worldwide, but actually only a few markets you can actually get into at the moment.
Yeah, we've really only launched in 3 markets right now in a full form. We're working on expanding supply. In 2022, when we launched Mounjaro in the US, between Lilly and Novo combined, we probably made enough of this class of medicines for about 12 million people on the planet.
Just 12.
And 2 weeks ago, the WHO said there's 1 billion people with obesity. So we're a little short of the goal. We set about building new facilities. Novo has as well. They're buying companies, and we're partnering with other companies to expand. But interesting thing is, these are proteins, so they're a very specific kind of medicine that's complicated. And then we put it in an injectable system, which has to be, we can't purify, we can't assure that it's pure at the end of the process. We have to make sure the whole process is. So it's ultra clean room conditions, basically, to make it. And then we put it in a little injection device. That kind of system, probably in the whole world, 80% of the capacity is already controlled by Lilly and Novo. So there are not built sites to go buy or rent to make more. We have to make them ourselves. So we're doing that. We currently have 6 manufacturing facilities under production or being stood up. We had 14 before, so that's like a 50% increase. We'll probably have a few more by the end of the year announced. I mean, we're going as hard as we can. But capital is not the constraint. Time is the constraint. Those buildings take 3 or 4 years from announcement to come online. So right now in the US, there's frustration because there's shortages of these, but we haven't even introduced them in most of Europe or the world. So more to do. One project we're working on could change that, which is an oral solid. So it's not a protein, it's chemistry, and it's not in that injectable device, which is so difficult to make. It's a pressed tablet. There's a lot of, the world is awash in those capacities. And so should the drug be successful, I think we'll be able to tap into quite a bit more supply, which will be good for the US, but even better for places like Brazil or Mexico or China, where actually most of the obese people on the planet live and where the biggest health difference can be made.
And I know that actually Lilly, through its almost education campaigns and some of its advertising, really have been thinking very much so about equality within the consumption of these drugs. But before we go to that particular part, before we think more about R&D and a way in which these can be orally ingested, I mean, there has been ultimately a hype. And it's almost not of your doing. It's not to do with the pharmaceutical companies, the biotechs that are bringing this. This is actually a force of culture, a force of social media, a force of celebrity. And so much so that you recently put out a campaign ahead of the Oscars saying, you know, please don't take this if you don't need it.
Yeah.
Can you articulate some of the frustration of those stakeholders, mainly your employees, who want this to be in the right hands of the right people right now?
Yeah, so we launched this campaign, and we can come back to why we did that, but we really do want to make sure the medicines get to the people who need them most. And obesity, so one reason we launched it is destigmatizing a health problem.
Yeah.
So people think of obesity as a willpower problem, as an appearance problem, as a clothes fitting problem, or as a mobility problem, not necessarily as a health problem. But people who have obesity or overweight all their life have a shorter life. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is a life-shortening condition, and you have a shorter life because your cardiovascular risk is higher, diabetes, dementia, 200 human diseases that are derived from carrying excess body weight or obesity. So that's why we invented these. That's number one. Number two, we didn't study them in otherwise healthy people. Yeah. While we don't have a great scientific rationale for the cutoffs of what we call BMI, body mass index, we just sort of notice what's higher or lower, and we use the cutoffs established in medicine. It could later turn out to be true that what we think is, a healthy body weight isn't. But what we do know is people who are obese do have all these adverse health consequences. And that's why we study them in those populations, and why we're doing further studies on preventing those very things that obesity can cause. The other issue, of course, is shortage, which you mentioned. And we know while we're working hard to make more product, every day we make more. It's not that we've had a production problem. I don't think Novo has either. I'm sure they're working as hard as we are. The demand curve is something we've never seen before in our industry. There just doesn't seem to be an edge to it. And so, of course, everyone wants to access the medicines, and 40% of Americans are obese, so that's a lot of the population. We can't make enough for that part of the population. We really can't make enough if every adult takes it. But if we just try to focus on the 40% that have obesity, we'll still fall short, but I think we'll make a bigger dent in health. And that's what we're trying to say in those commercials.
Are you speaking to the healthcare practitioner and community as well? How ultimately, this is a very complex thing, healthcare in the United States, and trust me, as a Brit, I'm still not got my head around it. But ultimately, how are you seeing the limitations, the constraints, the way in which healthcare is served in the US, and indeed better or worse in other geographies that you're currently in, helping or hindering you getting it into the hands of the right people?
Yeah, I think it's no different than any other condition where we see those health inequities in the US are built into the system. It's not about the medicine, it's more how the system works. So if you have, this is the best healthcare system in the world, it can also be one of the worst at the same time. Our system's complicated, it's diffuse, and it's expensive. So people who have trouble with their accessing healthcare have trouble accessing these obesity medications. The federal government themselves have said that we're not reimbursing these in Medicare. So for seniors, that makes terrible sense, because the one part of the system that has at least a notion of sort of some functional dynamics, and we can spend a lot of time on healthcare if you like, is the federal government, because they have the opportunity to provide preventative care, and they are the payer of last resort anyway.
Yeah.
So they have the most to gain by preventing disease. There was a moment of insight where they finally agreed in the Part D program that seniors use to pay for all vaccines with no out-of-pocket. It took COVID to get them to do that, but that's what they do now. That'll be a really wise investment for our country, for our taxpayers, and certainly for the health of seniors. In a lot of ways, obesity is kind of a parallel thing. The top 3 spenders for Medicare, which are heart disease, diabetes, and cancer, all are augmented by obesity. Yet the federal government doesn't pay for obesity drugs for seniors. Now, private companies do. Currently, about half of covered lives in America in the commercial markets have access to these medications with various constraints and steps and so forth. Some companies require 3 months of diet and exercise. Some require you to stay on them longer so you get the full benefit. That seems rational. But half don't. As you might guess, like those that do, or it's like about the wage scale. So we have a lot of banks in the room, bankers, I'm sure. Probably the banks pay for these drugs because we're well compensated in banking. But does Walmart pay? No. Do automakers? No. So I think that's like an obvious inequity, right? Is that it's not and that's true across all of commercial insurance. Medicaid, even worse.
I can imagine in this election cycle that we're basically already in, drug prices are going to come up, and it feels as though everyone turns to you and say, well, what are you doing about it? Ultimately, can you educate us a little bit about how this needs to go hand in glove with the federal government? How much realistically you can do your side and how much we can see done from the other side to ensure that the right people are able to access it at the right price? Yeah,
so we're used to this topic. It's a popular one. Drug pricing in the U.S. is a problem. I would agree with that. But what the problem is, we don't agree on with a lot of politicians. So first of all, healthcare in the U.S. is the most expensive system in the world. We spend 17% of our GDP on healthcare. That's about 5 points higher than high-spending European countries. But drugs make up only 11% of the total. In your home country, drugs make up 15% of the total. In France, it's almost 20%. So actually, the reason that healthcare is expensive has very little to do with medicine. Right. We spend less proportion on medicine than the average in the OECD. What do we spend it on? Well, a lot of salaries. So compensation is very good. I don't hear politicians saying we should pay our cardiologists like the French cardiologists. Why? Because we wouldn't have any cardiologists if we do that. We don't use that same logic for drugs, but literally if we paid for Mounjaro what the French do, we would never have Mounjaro. And the French probably will never have Mounjaro as a result, right? So there is an access and availability that we take for granted because we have it. But if we want to change the cost of it, we won't, because to produce these miracles, it takes resources. The third point is about coverage. We conflate what patients pay out of pocket with what the cost of the system is. And as I just said, the cost of the system is not extreme in the US. I can make a good argument we should spend more on drugs. But the out-of-pocket cost to people is quite variable and often quite high. Americans pay more than most OECD countries out of pocket than the rest of the group. Really only in China and India do you have scaled economies where there's so much out-of-pocket costs for patients. And we'd agree, those aren't as developed as the US. Most developed countries, out-of-pocket costs are low. Take France. In France, the average out-of-pocket for a prescription for a month is €5. In the US, it's over $100. So that's what people are experiencing. That's creating the political energy. And that's about insurance coverage, which we allow to be worse in our country. Why? I don't know. But if you go to the hospital, 95% of your costs are paid by insurance. If you buy a medicine, it's typically less than 80%. So we over-subsidize hospitals, we under-subsidize drugs. I don't understand why. I don't run the insurance system, but that's how it's evolved. We can change that. And there are cases where that's changed and had profound positive effect. So that's what we lobby for. Biden, in his speech the other night, talks about just cutting costs, cutting prices. But if we do that, we will, we're already in a situation where we would probably want more R&D spent, more new drugs. Yeah. I think we'll get less of them if we cut the reward. So
You did
That's a
take-
choice. We can make that choice, but I don't think it's a smart one.
You made a choice by access to insulin being capped, $35, I believe it was, a month. Why did you do that? What signal did that send?
Yeah, well, insulin is sort of a poster child for what can go wrong in the U.S. system. We got to a situation where list prices were high, about $250 per vial in the U.S. Our net pricing, which we published, was about $50. So you have this massive difference between the posted price, which often is the index for patients out of pocket, and the real price the manufacturer is getting. Where is all the rest going?
Yeah.
That's a cross subsidy, basically, to lower insurance premiums. So insurance companies and PBMs, pharmacy benefit managers, take that money and then they compete it away to get newer, healthier patients. But that subsidy is actually coming from sick people, which sounds like reverse insurance because it is. So we allow that to happen.
Yeah.
Why don't we make cost sharing based on net pricing, not a list? So our decision, we took two big decisions last year. One was to shrink that gap with the risk that we would be excluded from all these formularies. So because if you're an insurer, PBM, you like drugs that have low net pricing and high list. In fact, usually when we launch a drug, you might be surprised to learn, we're often criticized by pharmacy benefit managers for not pricing it higher. They tell us this. And at the same time, discounting it more.
I see.
So we got into that situation with insulin where there's a massive difference. And we allowed that to happen. Shame on us. But we just had enough. And our company was doing well. It was not a financial matter anymore. It was a reputational matter purely. And so we said, fine, we'll take all that out and dare insurance companies to delist the now cheap one in favor of more expensive ones. And there was so much energy on that insulin question. We saw what happened. Our competitors followed. Nobody got delisted. Today, our net pricing is a little lower, but actually the list price is dramatically lower, a third less, or 2/3 less than it was before. And that fixed a lot of the problems for insulin pricing. We did another thing, which is we capped the out-of-pocket cost. I mentioned earlier, out-of-pocket costs are high in the US. So when your contribution to your insulin prescription is more than $35, you'll never know it because we electronically, behind the scenes, adjudicate your claim down to $35, and Lilly pays for that.
And your investors were like, yeah, sure, great idea.
Somewhere in the room, I don't know, they can talk about it, but I think it became such a reputational hangover, they were more worried about that than the economics. The insulin business is fine. Okay, we have innovative insulins coming, but the insulins we launch now, or sell now, are 20 years old. We've gotten our reward. We've paid that back to our shareholders. We're in a situation, we're the only American insulin manufacturer. It's a very technically demanding and capital intensive undertaking. Really, people ask, are we blocking competitive entry? We're not. We welcome that. But no biotechnology company in their right mind would want to get into the insulin business. It's not an attractive economic proposition for them. It only works for us because we already sunk all the capital, which is billions. And so we have an obligation to supply at least this country and many others probably, and do it affordably. That's what we're doing. What we want is a reward on our newest inventions until their patents expire. And this is the deal we have with society. After 10, 12, 13 years, prices become very cheap. They should for most drugs. And that's how the system should work. I think that creates a huge updraft to the efficiency of healthcare in this country and others. The commonly used medications like Prozac, which we invented, 30 million Americans use that every day. Most of it's not made by us. It's made by generic companies. Yeah. And mostly it costs about 5 cents a day. What a cheap intervention. Or think of Lipitor, right? Used by 40 million Americans, 5 cents a day. So nothing else in healthcare deflates in costs except drugs. And that's why, back to the drug pricing, we should tolerate higher drug prices on patent because we want more of them so that when they get cheap, we get value in healthcare. Nothing else creates value in healthcare like that.
And the deal that you have with us and us with you is you'll go out and channel it into R&D and bring us new, incredible scientific breakthroughs. Before we go to that, though, the amount of focus you have on your reputation, it's been really interesting. And I've been seeing it around billboards of New York, but also on LinkedIn, for example. There has been We Are Lilly, like this education process that you seem to be going through of what it is that you provide. But also you are going not only direct to consumer with your advertising, but you're actually going direct to consumer.
Yeah.
I mean, What is the D2C play that you've just brought about? Because that's an interesting one.
It is interesting. Well, first on the broader corporate campaign, thanks for noticing. January 1st, I took over the marketing group to do that.
You went back to your roots.
Part of the reason was we want to change the kind of the tone, and we were in a leadership position in the industry. We're sort of in the mouths of everyone in cocktail parties, et cetera. So use that for good.
Yeah.
That's the idea, and the messaging around that is educating on the business model. We're here to invest in science and conquer terrible diseases, but also, that we're focused on patients. That should be the perceptions, and battling all the negative perceptions. So that's one. Secondly, I think consumers increasingly in society in general are very comfortable with direct relationships with products and services they buy, and this isn't new, right? This has been happening over the last 20 years. I don't know the last time I went to a department store, probably 15 years ago. I just go directly to the online stores of all the things I want and I buy them. And I think if we think about what is a hospital or what is a pharmacy, it's more like a department store, right? It's a one-to-many problem they solved. But now, because we have digital communication and digital distribution and all kinds of ways to connect with each other, people want that relationship, and we can facilitate it. So January 4th, we launched Lilly Direct, which is a DTC fulfillment platform. It is partnered with a number of telehealth platforms, so you can also use it for healthcare itself, or you can find a doctor in your area who you might want to raise your condition with and get a Lilly medicine. No obligation for that doctor to write a Lilly medicine. But we also then do education and fulfillment. So people who are on our medicines can learn about how to take better care of themselves, and they can have routine prescriptions delivered to their house. Surprisingly successful. So I think it was interesting because it was new. Do people use it? Yes, at scale. In fact, we're having trouble keeping up. So there was a need there, which was fulfilled or is being fulfilled, and you'll see more in that department from us, because obviously consumers want reliability. They want a relationship with their manufacturer. And I think the chaos of US healthcare we talked about earlier, in some ways we can take out some of that. So on supply, we can communicate, okay, we don't have it today, but in 2 weeks' time, your shipment will arrive. That gives peace of mind, and CVS and Walmart can't do that.
And you also know it's real.
And
I mean, that's
exactly.
the other issue with
it gives confidence, right, that it is the legitimate. And then also these savings offers, we all have these coupons, et cetera. There's a lot of runaround at pharmacies. People bring them in, and the pharmacist doesn't want to type in the number. Sorry, I'm not doing that. On our site, every time it's applied. So they have the confidence they're getting the best value.
And also, I mean, has there been any frustration, just you, I mean, the fact that you've wanted to bring marketing under your remit, the fact that everyone was thinking of these drugs by the name Ozempic or Wegovy, and you're like, that's not our one. Yeah. But meanwhile, TikTok is, influencers on TikTok were literally guessing what the new drug of yours was going to be called.
Yes.
And sort of the fact that social media is so interested in your naming, your marketing, your manufacturing. I mean, Zepbound won, but how extraordinary is that?
Yeah, it is a new space for us. I think I mentioned Prozac earlier. That was probably the last time we had something like that. And I think it indicates a couple of things. One, a common condition that a lot of people care a lot about, and a drug that is highly effective.
Yeah.
And so you move from just a medical sphere to a public sphere of conversation. So we hope to direct that conversation online to the degree we can, in a way that's productive, similar to our advertising about these are serious drugs for serious disease. And if people are suffering from obesity and we can help them, we want to do that. And that people use the drugs safely and on label and appropriately, and they buy them from legitimate sources. And so that's sort of our focus with that online chat, but it's extraordinary. And every time I think I've seen it all, someone sends me a link to something else. There was a guy, there's someone who made an entire YouTube channel just about the CEO of Lilly that makes Zepbound. And he's probably reporting on this thing now, on like what I said about Zepbound and like what's the supply situation. It's fascinating.
You're a celeb.
Yeah. I don't think of myself that way, nor do my teenage kids.
They're grounding.
Yeah.
Kids at all times.
Exactly.
What also is grounding is, yes, it's wonderful that these drugs that you've put so many decades of work into are not only being applicable to weight and obesity, which is now called, of course, a disease and not just something that one chooses as a lifestyle. But it's also helping, as we said, liver, heart. Where else would you like everyone to be talking about, though, as well? Because we know you all for the work you're doing on Alzheimer's, for the work you've been doing on cancer, for the work on autoimmune. I mean, I've got a father with ulcerative colitis. That's something I particularly care about. How much are you able to take this incredible success story and start really funneling into the R&D element of things?
Well, we always have kind of done that. I think, in the nature of industry is you have these asymmetrical rewards, these blockbusters. And they fund all the other failures, but also a number of drugs that aren't quite as successful, but are really valuable to one person or another, right? We always start with the idea that we work on, and I think a Lilly is for this kind of thing, work on hard, tough diseases that affect a lot of people.
Yeah.
A lot of the drugs we read about in the last 10 years have been about drugs that make a big difference in tough diseases for a few people. And sometimes we end up there. But our goal is mostly to work on scaled problems. So we're doing that, and we select therapeutic spaces to do that in, where we have a lot of expertise. I think we can invest, given our size and our history, through the ups and downs of science, which are inevitable. And we talked about these GLP-1s. I mean, again, it's been 20 years, and it's an overnight success, right? It's because we invested that whole way. Alzheimer's is an even more dramatic story. I mean, that's 35 years we've been investing there.
Yeah.
Still waiting for our first FDA approval.
Were you frustrated by that? Because it came as a surprise that you're having to do more work.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, surprises are frustrating. But as I said to my team that day, we've been working on this for 35 years. I don't think a few more months is going to make that big of a difference. People are waiting for that solution. It's our job to deliver it. There's questions. It's a serious condition. The drugs are serious, and they're not always safe in everybody. We need to have that conversation with the FDA and with the public. I think it's healthy.
It's the concern around brain swelling.
Yeah, exactly. Which isn't, not everyone's afflicted by this, but a single-digit percentage are, and doctors and people who care about that. We should invest the time to explain it. I think that's fair. But there's an example where we've invested over a huge amount of time, mostly failed. Each time we failed, we learned something. Sometimes you fail and you have no idea why. You should stop, I think. But if you fail and you learn something, and it's a serious condition that only something like a Lilly can produce a solution for, that's when we keep going. And I do think, as we look ahead, speaking of neurodegenerative conditions, we're in the golden era of metabolic health right now.
Yeah.
Because we have great solutions. We just need to make more volume. I think the next decade will be about neurodegeneration, which are, of course, Alzheimer's is the most common condition, but Parkinson's, ALS. I think these are becoming tractable problems, and we're in a good position to make a big difference in those spaces. And they're terrible, frightening conditions that nobody wants. So prevention is really what we should be going for. And I'm particularly excited about the difference Lilly can make there. You mentioned autoimmune disease, also very common. There's over 200 autoimmune diseases. The biology is very complex, but we're beginning to unwind it. And I think we're entering a period where we could have a number of new drugs for both small or diseases that affect a few people, but also broadly, like ulcerative colitis and Crohn's, that could really move from treatment, symptom remission, to actually disease remission. Wow. And I think that's where you can take a medicine on and off, and you don't have to worry about the condition. So that's a future we see there. Of course, cancer, every drug company is involved in cancer. It's, again, a frightening condition. It's probably 200 diseases or more. So it's a complicated space. Breakthroughs are made in individual diseases within that 200 basket. But we don't have yet like common things like we do with obesity, where now we can address metabolic health broadly. So a lot more work to do there. Although some, terrible cancers are now basically chronic diseases already. Prostate, many lymphomas, breast cancer. People can live decades after diagnosis, and in my lifetime that happened. So I think we need to keep investing and keep working on this, and with partners in the health community. But that's a hard one. But again, that's what a Lilly's for: is keep working on those tough problems.
And it's what a Lilly partnering with others,
of course,
is for. What is that ecosystem like at the moment? Is
Yeah.
it rich? How does it compare to other biotech spheres in the world?
Well, I mean, I think that's something that's really changed at Lilly in the last 20 years. I started my career in our BD M&A group, which was meant to go out and find new medicines. And so I know firsthand at that time how difficult it was to convince anyone to pay attention to that activity in the company. And a number of companies were dramatically successful in the 2000s, 2010, really just through business development, right? So we want to have core science. We want to develop our own medicines. Tirzepatide's invented by 3 guys in Indianapolis, and that's great because the economics are fantastic. But we also need to complement that with outside innovation and with partnerships. And even if those drugs aren't successful, I like the competitive dynamic that presents, that our scientists think they have to compete for resources with the rest of the world, not just the people they sit next to.
Yeah.
So that's really helped us get sharper in R&D. And I said when I started in 2017, I put a number out there, it was made up by me, of a third of our pipeline
Seems good.
should be from the outside. And people outside said that's it, and people inside said we'll never get there. But actually, it's about half right now.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. So we've been very active. We do mostly small deals and partnerships with early phase. We think that that's a good strategy for several reasons. It's a lot cheaper early. Secondly, we can add more value, right? We're not just buying something when it's ripe to be plucked and presented in the market. It can be developed inside our walls. We have a lot of expertise and scale to do that. And, I think if we can bat above average in picking winners, we can do 10 small deals that can more than offset one good one that was more expensive. So that's sort of our motion on partnerships. And I think the ecosystem's thriving. In a weird way, it's particularly thriving for people in my chair because the last 2 years have been brutal in the public markets for biotechs. This year's starting a lot better. And that presented a lot of good partnering and buying opportunities for people with capital who had an interest, while everyone else was focused on NVIDIA and AI. Yeah, that will come and go, but we'll be active in partnering. And one last thing is, we've thought about doing this even earlier, sort of pre-public and partial engagement in a way where we can use our strengths to help biotech entrepreneurs build their own company, and along the way take a progressive interest in what they're doing. So we've started this idea called Catalyze 360, which is a physical presence we offer. So one of the problems if you're an entrepreneur is you're growing fast, you have to keep moving.
Labs and stuff.
Yeah, so we buy just a bigger building that you don't have to keep moving. You can just take more modules of. Capital, of course, we have corporate venture arm, but also services. So if you have a 20-person biotech and you need a regulatory expertise, you don't go hire one regulatory expert, you rent it from the market. And that person probably retired from Merck or Pfizer or some other company, and they're not as in touch. Well, we offer as a service like our regulatory person. So it's like a partnership to help you grow. And then, of course, we invest in equity along the way. And if they're successful, we can be rewarded as they monetize their company. Or if we're really interested, we can acquire them. And they know us and we know them. So that's a new motion we're trying, and I think is an interesting way to think about the ecosystem, as you said, and the creating partnerships very early in a biotech's life.
You referenced that everyone else was busy looking at NVIDIA, and I mean, you're up, what I think, some tenfold since 2017, and certainly doubled in the last 12 months. And we know the story around NVIDIA's share price, for example, and the way AI has captured our attention. You are this is not your first rodeo with AI. You've been on the board of Adobe. You understand how technology works hand in hand with what you do. Therefore, tell us how artificial intelligence is top of mind for you at Lilly. Is it affecting the biotechs you work with, or indeed more in-house as well with your pipeline?
Yeah, I mean, super exciting moment. And I'm a kind of a tech geek. So I remember distinctly when someone sent me a link to ChatGPT in November of 22, and I started playing with this thing, and I was like, wow, this is a big deal.
Early adopter.
Yeah, I was an early adopter. So, I think it works in a company like Lilly in 3 ways. First, of course, we need to adopt the software and services that are just going to be used by everybody to become productive. And I do think I don't know how economists will measure the productivity increase, but this has the chance to dramatically increase the productivity of particularly white collar work. Yeah. And whether that's job growth avoidance, that's a kind of productivity, or shifting work to more valuable creative exercises that allow the mundane things to be taken care of by a machine. We have to do that. Secondly, there are many applications where we can take an analogy from one place in the economy and put it into industry-specific processes we have. That takes a bit of work because we have to probably write some code and put it in our piece. But I'll give you an example. We're trying to make more incretins, more Mounjaro. I was recently at a factory in France where we do that. And we've set up a machine learning AI algorithm to look at what they call micro stoppages on a production line. These are stoppages of less than half a second. If you ask an engineer to study this problem, they get bored because there's a lot of different ones and they're very short and it's difficult to pay attention to. But the machine never gets bored. And after 6 months, they improved yield by 5%. Okay, 5%, but 5% for me at a global level on Mounjaro is the difference between a meet and a beat.
Yeah.
So like putting that into the layers of the processes we already run, maybe it's about clinical trial enrollment speed or some other thing that's specific to the industry, hugely powerful and stickier, maybe creating some competitive advantage. The ultimate thing is IP generation. And that's about the inventive step of making a new molecule. So we've been working on that for about 5 or 6 years already. Of course, these new models are quite interesting and add to models we built. Like a lot of other industries, there's a lot of funding going into biotechs that are working on this problem.
Yeah.
They get money and then they start calling us to say, hey, can we access your data? So I think like a lot of other sectors, the winners there will be those not with the best algorithms, but with the best data.
And are you teaming up and investing in those that then can access your data?
At times, but being very careful about what happens to that data and what happens to the weightings that are trained by the data. So that's an important piece of that's like an IP know-how ourselves. But mostly we're investing in our own efforts, which are in 2 domains right now, organic chemistry and in refining proteins and biologics. So in both these domains, we have a ton of data. We've been making drugs for 130 years. We've been cataloging drugs we've made for like 70. And over the last 10 years or 7 years, really, we took all those catalog medicines, which were literally like in filing cabinets, like here's the chemical and here's what, and we digitized it all.
Phew.
So we can drop that into the algorithm and it can learn what's organic chemistry and how does it work. And then we feed it a problem, like a protein we want to target. And it comes up with interesting and different starting places for our med chemists to go to work. And so that's quite an interesting thing. A little bit like the Adobe analogy, where if you ask Firefly, their graphic design AI tool, oh, show me, whatever, a flower in a girl's hair on a hill. It'll come up with a picture and it's not the one you would have drawn. And that sort of stimulates the creative process. So that's kind of one application. The other is on refining proteins and antibodies. We have a ton of data about problems that have occurred after we made them. And so, of course, scientists look for those same patterns, but it's complicated. There's like 20 or 30 different questions you might ask. And then those are on many, many dimensions to try to pick a winner early from a campaign to make a new protein or antibody. So by putting that in a machine, we avoid more mistakes. So that's like the reverse. The first is like widen the funnel. This is like narrow the funnel. And those are 2 applications that are at scale for us now. There'll be more. And I have no doubt that in 10 years, maybe we'll be talking about drugs that were hugely enabled by AI to get to market. Right now it's early. We have to manage expectations, but we're in a good place to take advantage of that.
What I know the audience wants to take advantage of is your expertise globally as well. And you mentioned France, for example, and going there and traveling and doing a lab check there. You were very much within China for your business for a long time, a key emerging market in the healthcare space. You also, from what I understand, still depend these new drugs that particularly we're looking at and has been built into your market capitalization, the supply chain is coming in some parts from China. How is that as a geopolitical headwind to try and navigate at the moment as a global CEO?
Yeah, I mean, it's on everyone's mind. I get the question a lot. I mean, to be clear, we don't rely on China ourselves for very many things as a sole source, and those that we do, we're like everyone else, have a China plus one strategy, or we'll just in-source it ourselves.
How long have you done that?
A couple of years now. Yeah, but it's it's an emerging concern. I would point out a couple of things. One, China is worried about the same thing, and I think taking the temperature down on that is probably good for both sides, because a sudden change could have a human health consequence.
Yeah.
The two countries did come together last year to work on climate, for instance. But I think when I speak to political leaders, I say the same thing. I think actually there should be sort of a health accord like that as well. I think we have common cause in this way. Problems still could happen. We saw that during COVID, where like low-cost items, which were single-sourced out of places like China or India, became very scarce. But we can avoid some problems by having treaties that would say, let's not constrain trade on purpose to the consequence of human health. And API, active ingredient for medicines, is one of those things. Most of the dependency we have as a country, by the way, is on active pharmaceutical ingredients for generic drugs. Primarily antibiotics. So if we're going to invest in anything as a country in dual sourcing, that's what I would do first, is take mostly generic antibiotics and find alternative sources. The problem is that the generic industry itself is not capitalized to do that. I think the single most valuable generic company might be Teva. What are they, like $10 billion in market cap? We're going to spend $10 billion in CapEx probably in the next couple of years on GLP-1s alone at Lilly.
Boy.
So you need something else to cause that shift in the sort of China dependency for generics. So that's a vexing problem that we'll contribute to intellectually, but it's actually not medicines we're making.
Do you think China and US is the geopolitical headwind you face most? Or you mentioned Teva, which of course we know might be impacted by other areas of war and geopolitics at the moment.
I mean, everything's getting a little spicier these days, right? I think it's we're in an area of deglobalization, that's for sure, or at least static globalization. That tailwind is over. We're having to create redundant things, so that's inherently inefficient.
Yeah.
It's good if you're a pipe fitter or you build production facilities for a living, because there'll be more capacity. Maybe that creates a resilience that has a societal value globally. Because perhaps running a supply chain, and like right now we're easily at 100% capacity, and we did what everyone did, which was try to optimize efficiency. But maybe in healthcare that's not a good thing, and there should be a premium paid to have a little bit of slack, and that's being forced by the geopolitical conflicts. But maybe in the end it's a better position to be in anyway. But whether it be Middle East, Russia, China, who knows what the next one is. I think we're all, prepared in our war rooms and our, enterprise risk management processes for more trouble ahead. And we're building those costs and those contingencies into our forward planning. And if they don't materialize, and let's hope they don't, then good, but we'll have a little extra cost. I think that's sort of how pragmatically most businesses are looking at the situation.
Be pragmatic with the economy as well. I mean, it's in the name of what this club stands for. And Jamie Dimon, another prominent member, was today saying, look, there's still a risk of recession in the US. We still see inflation data today. How much do you feel the economy is working with you or against you right now as a global leader?
For us, it's a very lagged effect on healthcare, because a lot of healthcare spending is tied up in the government budgeting process, which is lagged. So, first economies sag, then taxes are reduced, then legislators might get around to doing something about that, or they just incur a deficit and roll on. So we're pretty buffered from that. Although in out-of-pocket markets like the US, like China, like India, you do see choices being made, actually, which is interesting, because health probably is one of the later choices. But the people in the food business say the same thing. People buy different things or buy less of them. That happens in our business too, but pretty lagged. I think the biggest thing I'm noticing now is that we probably have kind of this blue collar boom going on here. And as we're trying to build 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 manufacturing sites,
It's more expensive.
it's very expensive. Yeah. And that's something, for in our sector, we're lucky to have good margins. So we just eat it. And as I said earlier, time is our enemy. So we're building sites 3 shifts a day, 24/7 with lights on at every new manufacturing site. But it's expensive. It's more than double 5 years ago.
So is talent actually your headache, whether it be from the
And
manufacturing
materials,
perspective or
right? The concrete, steel, and so forth, all that, which is upstream. At the same time, some sectors are laying off people, tech is laying off people, et cetera. So yeah, the economy's good, could be better. For us, we're pretty buffered.
You just said how AI eventually makes more efficient, productive, perhaps less hiring. Is that something you're already doing, already thinking of, even laying people off at Lilly?
We're not contemplating layoffs right now, although there's, in a way, in any large organization, there's always some sort of redundancy happening because of a shift in priorities or a technology change. So, there are changes happening, but probably our workforce will continue to grow. Most our growth will be in production employees, some in laboratories. Most of that's happening outside of Indianapolis. I'm pretty focused on 2 big problems for our company. You haven't asked us yet what keeps me up at night. There's a lot of things in the world, but inside Lilly, the 2 big ones are R&D productivity and then losing what makes us effective.
Right.
And what makes us effective, we're, old company, family owned for a long period of time, run by the family for 100 years of our history, 3 generations. That's so unique. And as a result, we have a very distinctive culture and way of working, which is, on the one hand, super flat and non-hierarchical. Work happens rather organically, and it almost matters more who you know than who you are to get things done sometimes. We can't lose that. And at the same time, we can be like a bad behaving family, like bicker with ourselves and so forth, because everyone's sort of together a long time. People stay with the company long periods of time. So a lot of my job is to get that, accentuate the good and downplay the negatives. And I think one of the reasons we've been highly successful is that we run a flat structure. I think we have 1 less layer than almost every other major pharmaceutical company. So that means 1 less person between me and the shop floor, the sales rep or whatever, the lab scientist. We want to keep that. So if we grow, it gets harder to do that. So we're very focused on minimizing headcount growth where we can. Not for costs, but really to keep what makes us effective. Because if we grow, we'll lose that sense of how do I know how to get things done outside of a committee and move at the speed of the market or faster than our competitors at least, and keep what's good about Lilly.
Is diversity good at Lilly?
It
that
is.
Something that you think about a pendulum shifting from one side to the other about?
I know. It's kind of silly. I mean, when I became CEO, I really leaned into this for 2 reasons. One is talent access. And this is a frame I don't hear a lot in those 2 extreme criticisms or proponents. I don't know why, but if you think, I believe that human intelligence and capability is spread uniformly between genders and races and sexual orientation and whatever. I really believe that because I've met lots of people who are very different from me who are brilliant. So if we don't look like the population, we're losing talent. If we want to skim the top 1% of the bell curve, then we need to look like the top 1% of the bell curve, which I think is all of society. So that's a reason to embrace diversity. And I think we found a lot of success with that. You might be like, so when I started as CEO, we had about a little less than 30% of global management jobs were staffed by women. And this year we'll cross 50%.
Oh, wow.
And so that was 7 years. The projection to get there in 2017 was 73 years at the current rate. So we did things to cause that, but we will reach gender parity in management in 2024.
Wow.
And I don't think we're not looking for headlines about that or anything, but I actually think that's helped us become more valuable as a company in a pretty dramatic way. And often we were overlooking talent that now surprises us on the upside. So it's a word that can be a trigger, red flag word, diversity and inclusion, but it's been key to our success in every way. And so from a representation perspective, we're basically, like with women, almost there on every other dimension. For us, it's more about making sure we're getting the ideas and recognizing the talent inside our company, being better managers and leaders, getting the most out of our team, being able to lead across difference. And for a company, you know, based in the Midwest, which can be a little homogeneous, that's some work to do still on skill and leader training.
Time has flown. I like that you front run oh goodness, what makes you not sleep at night?
It's usually the last question.
What gets you up in the morning? What gets you psyched other than those 3 kids that are keeping you plenty humble?
Yeah.
What really energizes you at the moment?
I mean, we touched on 2 of the things. I mean, I'm fascinated by science and by what we can do medically for the future. And I really believe we're in the early innings of what's possible. This industry's been around more than 100 years, maybe 50 years in its modern form, but this is the age of biotechnology in conquering human suffering is just beginning. And I'm super excited by that, by what I see in our labs. And then we talked about the other thing, which is AI, which is really about harnessing knowledge in a powerful way to make everyone more successful, including our scientists. So I think those 2 things together, it's going to be a great opportunity ahead. Someone's going to seize it. I hope it's Lilly.
David, we've had such a joy listening to you. It has flown by. Thank you so much
for
all your
having
expertise.
me. Thank you, Barbara. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much, Caroline.
What a terrific conversation and such a hopeful one. We have many great speakers coming up. I'm going to zip through them very quickly. March the 27th, we're back for an evening reception with Chris Waller, a member of the Board of Governors of the Fed. April 2nd, we'll host Jeremy Siegel at the Wharton School. He'll be in a conversation with John Williams, our club chair. The chair of the Federal Communications Commission, Jessica Rosenworcel, will be here April 4th. And April 11th, Susan Collins, the fairly new president and CEO of the Boston Fed, will join us. And April 16th, we'll have the governor of the Bank of France, also in a conversation with John Williams. And then April 23rd, Jamie Dimon will join us, will return to join us. We've had him, of course, in prior years. And April 30th, Jared Bernstein, the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors. So all these are listed on the website. Please be sure to review the dates. We have lots more that will be added for the May-June period. And as always, we want to recognize those of our 373 Centennial members joining us today, either in the room or online, as their contributions continue to provide the financial backbone for all the programming that we do. So thank you for attending today. If you're virtual, we're going to say goodbye. And if you're in the room, please enjoy your lunch. Thank you.